Hello, fifth grade, and welcome to our ELA notes for Unit 1, Week 3. Let's go ahead and begin with our vocabulary first. Your first vocabulary word is the word indicated. Something is indicated when it is shown. The directions indicated the next step. What kind of things are indicated on a map? So indicated is another fancy way of saying to show something. Your second word is the word emphasis. Emphasis is when you want someone to focus on something or you want to draw a lot of attention to something. The teacher placed emphasis on the important words. Why might you only place emphasis on some words? Next, we have the word debris. Now, even though this word is spelled with an S, you don't actually pronounce the S at the end. Debris is the scattered pieces lying around after something has been damaged. So think about if there was an earthquake and a building fell because of the earthquake. The debris is the broken up pieces of the building that got thrown around during that event. Debris from the storm covered the street. When might you see debris? Next is the word generations. Generations are groups of people of different ages. 4 generations gathered for a family reunion. So the kids and the people that are your age, that's your generation. Your parents are a different generation. Your grandparents are a different generation. They're different age groups. Next, we have the word spectacular. Spectacular means something that's very impressive or amazing or something that's very unusual. So if you watch a fireworks display, you can describe the fireworks as being very spectacular. Our next word is the word sheer. Now, sheer has more than one meaning, but for your particular story and this particular week's lessons, we're going to focus on sheer, meaning the word steep. You can say we climbed down the sheer mountainside. That means a really steep mountainside. That means it turns down very, very sharply. It's not kind of like smoothly angling down a little bit at a time. It has a very sheer or steep drop to it. Your next word is the word naturalist. A naturalist is a person who studies nature, such as plants and animals. You can see that it has the word natural in it. That comes from the word nature. And your last word is the word encounter. An encounter is an unexpected meeting. Maybe we will have an encounter with a famous person. With whom would you like to have an encounter? So it's running into someone or something unexpectedly. A lot of times people, if they go camping out in the woods, they may encounter a wild animal. All right, let's take a look at your spelling words for this week. We're working with words that have the varying U sound in them. So you have the long U, the one with the line over it, that says you. We have the short sound, one with the little circle above it. And we have the oo sound, the one with the 2 dots. So your words for this week are tuna, duty, lose, few, doom, bamboo, soothe, crooks, hoof, hooks, booth, handbook, prove, mute, amuse, plume, hue, view, bruise, union, theme, coach, bride, strewn, and accuse. Let's take a look at your ELA notes for this week. Now, for our phonics and spelling, we're going to look at different variations of those words. So how do you make the long U sound where it says you? You can have it with U consonant letter E, like the word cute or amuse or mute. You can have it with a UE, like clue, blue, and hue. Or you could spell it with an EW or just a U by itself, like union or few or through. So those words have the U long sound in it, where it's pronounced like the word you. You can also have the U sound being ooh, like tuna, duty. or prove and lose. That's an O consonant E. You can spell it with a U consonant E like plume or tune or duke. Notice how these ones are saying ooh, not you, like the first set. You can have it with a double O, spelling like the words booth, soothe, and hoof. And you can have it with a UI like bruise or cruise. Now you can also make the short O sound like the sound using two O's like foot or crook or wood, or you can make it with just a U like put or bush. Next, let's take a look at your comprehension skill and strategy. So here you're going to focus on cause and effect. Now, a cause-effect relationship is where something, an event, which is the cause, makes another event happen. That's the effect. So it's something that causes something else to happen. The cause explains why something happens, and the effect describes what happened. So if you say the student left their chair pulled out, so the classmate tripped over it, the cause, what caused the classmate to trip? The chair being left pulled out. What was the effect of the chair being left out? The classmate tripped over it. I can say, I took my dog for a walk. It was really happy. So the cause of the happiness was taking the dog for the walk. The effect after we went for the walk was the happiness. Or you can say, when I added vinegar to baking soda, it fizzed and bubbled a lot. So what is the cause? Mixing the vinegar and the baking soda. The effect is what happened when we did that. It fizzed and it bubbled a lot. Now, our genre for this week is narrative nonfiction. Now, what makes this unique is that narrative nonfiction is a true story, but it's written in the style of a fiction writing or of a fictional novel. So it's written like a fictional story where it's told by a narrator. It contains kind of the elements that you would find in a fictional story. But the narrator is usually a person who was actually a part of it, and it was something that really happened to them. So even though it's focused on telling something like a story, it still contains real events and real people and real places. So it's still nonfiction. It's something that's real, but it's told in the style of someone who's telling you a story. So if your friend is telling you about their camping trip, they're explaining it in the style of a narrative nonfiction. They're explaining and telling you the story, and they are a part of that story at the same time. All right, your vocab strategy is homographs and homonyms. Now, I know in your text, it kind of lumps these two together, but they are separate things. So homographs comes from the two roots, homo and graph. Homo means the same, and graph means writing or spelling. So homographs are two or more words that have the same spelling, but they have different meanings and different pronunciation. So the way you say it is different, and the meaning that it has is different, but it's spelled the same. So a lot of times homographs are just called multiple meaning words. So you can have the word bow and bow are both spelled B-O-W. Bow means to bend at the waist, and bow is, you can think of it as a pair of tied loops or a hair bow or a bow for a bow and arrow. All of those are spelled the same way, but they have different meanings and it can have different pronunciations. Now we have the word close and close. One has an S sound at the end, the other has a Z sound at the end. So when something is close, it's nearby. But if you were told to close the door, that means to shut the door. So it's the opposite of open. Now, homonyms are two or more words that have the same spelling and the same pronunciation. So you say it the same way, you spell it the same way. The only difference is the meaning. So you can have the word left. So left can either mean the opposite of right, so a direction, right and left, or it can tell you how many are remaining. So if I ask you how many cookies are left in the cookie jar, I'm asking you about a quantity, a number. The word duck. Duck can either mean an animal that quacks and flies, or if I tell you to duck under your table, I'm asking you to squat or bend down under something. You can also have the word change. Change can either mean the money you get back when you overpay for something, or change can be some kind of difference that you're making. We can also use the word light. Light can be something that brightens an area like a lamp, or light can mean the opposite of heavy. So a box that is very light, doesn't have very much stuff in it, it's easy to carry, as opposed to a box that is heavy. Two more examples are the words spring and space. Spring can either be the season right before summer, or it can mean any kind of sudden moving or jumping that goes on around you, like they spring out from behind a bush. Or a spring can be a coil that bounces back. And our last one over here for our examples is space. Space can either mean a large open area, or space can describe the distance between a few objects or two objects. Next, let's get into our grammar. So here we're going to focus on sentences and coordinating conjunctions. A simple sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. Simple sentences include a subject and a predicate. So Sarah likes to read. Sarah does not like to write. Now we can combine simple sentences in a few different ways. You can have two sentences that are combined either with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, such as the words and, or but. So Sarah likes to read, comma, but Sarah does not like to write. Now, a compound sentence contains two or more related sentences that are joined by coordinating conjunctions, such as the words and, or but. So these conjunctions have different functions. And is putting ideas together, it's joining them, but shows a change in the thought. So you're changing your mind somewhere along the way. And the word or gives you a choice. So you always put a comma before the coordinating conjunction in a compound sentence. We went to the park, comma, and we went to the store. We were going to the beach, comma, but it started raining. Do you want to ride bikes, comma, or do you want to go for a walk? Now we can also have things that are called run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are when you're joining two sentences or more that should be separated. You correct a run-on sentence by separating the two ideas into either two separate sentences or by adding a coordinating conjunction and commas. So I can say, my sister and I went to the beach. We were so excited to see the blue skies and big waves. That's a run-on sentence. There's a lot of ideas in there that are not being separated properly. We can split these into separate sentences. My sister and I went to the beach, period. That's your first complete thought. Your second thought is, we were so excited to see the blue skies and the big waves. Now, again, we can use coordinating conjunctions, and these are connecting words that help us connect or join two words, phrases, or clauses. Clauses are just basically, they can be independent, so like a simple sentence, or dependent, and we'll get into those more next week. We use a comma and a coordinating conjunction to join two independent clauses to form or make a compound sentence. You don't use a comma when you're connecting two words or phrases. Now, other than that, you can also use a semicolon to join two independent clauses if no conjunction is being used between them. So I can say the museum at Ellis Island was fascinating, and then I can put a semicolon there, which basically looks like a comma with a period on top. The museum at Ellis Island was fascinating. The Statue of Liberty was spectacular. So here, this semicolon shows me that I'm combining two sentences that are about the same general things, about the same idea. Now, conjunctions are, like we said, they're connecting words. So they can connect two nouns. You don't use a comma there, so cats and cows. It can connect two verbs, so things that you do, shouts or kicks. It can connect two adjectives, and those are describing words, short and simple. Two adverbs, and remember, adverbs are the way something is done, so quickly but carefully. Or two independent clauses, which we also call simple sentences. Now for this is the only one where we use a comma. The other ones we did not use commas for. So I can say Dylan writes better songs, comma, but Britney Spears sells more records. So here I have two thoughts, two independent clauses that I'm using a comma and a coordinating conjunction to separate. Now, our coordinating conjunctions, the easiest way to remember them is to remember the word fanboys. So fanboys are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Fanboys. Fanboys are conjunctions with meanings and sentences. So how can we use them? For means because. Sam drank some water, comma, for he was thirsty. So here it means because. And means in addition to. So I take milk and sugar in my tea. Nor means and not. Sarah doesn't like apples, nor does she like pears. Word but means however. All the children wanted to eat pizza, comma, but no one wanted to buy it. Or we could go to the zoo, comma, or we could go to a theme park. Yet the weather was cold and wet, yet we enjoyed it very much. And then so can mean therefore. He is sick, comma, so he is not going to school. Now remember, when you use a coordinating conjunction, you put a comma before your fanboy, before the coordinating conjunction, and then you add the coordinating conjunction after. All right, that takes us to the end of our notes. Let's go ahead and take a look at your weekly story. Now, your story this week is a narrative nonfiction, just like we talked about, and it is called Camping with the President.
Genre: narrative nonfiction. Camping with the President by Ginger Wadsworth, illustrated by Karen Dugan. President Theodore Roosevelt mounted his favorite horse and shook the reins. He and Renown shot out the White House stable door. They galloped straight for the woods on their daily ride. As always, hooves pounded behind them. The president made sure that the Secret Service had to ride hard to keep up with him. America's 26th president loved his busy job, except for one thing. He missed what he called the strenuous life. He wanted to hike alone through the woods whistling for birds. He longed to chop wood or hunt wild animals. Most nights, he set aside time to read. Some of his favorite books were about nature. One evening in the White House, the president finished John Muir's newest book, Our National Parks. The author's descriptions of California's Yosemite National Park fascinated the president. He tried to picture the 3,000-foot-high walls that surrounded Yosemite Valley. Besides all the waterfalls, there were granite boulders bigger than buildings, with names like Half Dome and North Dome. Distant mountain peaks soared over 10,000 feet into the sky. Muir's nature essays clearly indicated a man with strong opinions about land preservation. Roosevelt enjoyed lively discussions. It would be exciting to talk with the country's best-known expert on conservation and explore Yosemite. But why couldn't he? He was the president of the entire United States, wasn't he? The president picked up his pen. He wrote so fast that his spectacles danced to the tip of his nose. Dear Mr. Muir, I am coming west. I want to go camping with you and no one else. In his letter, he explained that he had already decided to take a fact-finding trip in the spring of 1903. Roosevelt had never seen the Far West, and he was eager to meet the people and learn about the natural resources, such as minerals, trees, and water. This visit would help the president make better decisions about the region in the future. Roosevelt wrote Muir that he would first visit Yellowstone National Park. After seeing the Grand Canyon and Arizona, he would come to California by train. To wrap up his trip, the president asked Muir to guide him through the Yosemite area. While camping and avoiding dignitaries, they could talk. The president grinned as he stamped his official seal on the back of the envelope. Camping sounded bully. He especially wanted to see California's giant sequoia trees, the largest living things in the world. 4 whole days in the Yosemite wilderness. The president felt giddy with excitement. He would have to get some Western clothes. Months later, the president's special train sped southeast across California, from Oakland on the coast to reach the tiny town of Raymond at the end of the railroad line. "I am delighted to meet you," President Theodore Roosevelt said, pumping Muir's hand up and down. Soon, Roosevelt and Muir were escorted with the rest of the presidential party in stagecoaches some 30 miles up through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada into the Yosemite wilderness. The 2 men stood in the Mariposa Grove of big trees in front of the Grizzly Giant, one of the largest giant sequoia trees in the world. On either side of Muir and Roosevelt, important men, including George Pardee, governor of California, posed for the cameras. Poof! Burning white flash powder blinded them. Roosevelt smiled his famous toothy grin for the cameras. Reporters would write about the Grizzly Giant and the other trees in this grove, but they wouldn't have much else to write about because the president didn't plan on seeing them anytime soon. The president announced that he was prepared to go into the Yosemite with John Muir. "I want to drop politics absolutely for 4 days." He punched his fist in his hand for emphasis. Everyone roared with disappointment, but there was no arguing with the strong-willed leader of the United States. He waved away the reporters. All the dignitaries climbed into their stagecoaches. 30 cavalrymen mounted their dapple-gray horses. They saluted their president. Finally, the president even ordered his Secret Service men to stay away. Spurs jingled and leather creaked. The president watched everyone head down the zigzagging road to the nearest town. 3 men waited with the pack animals and gear. They were under the watchful eye of Government Ranger Charlie Leidig. Charlie's family ran a hotel in Yosemite Valley, where he had lived and worked his entire life. He was the perfect man to be in charge of the day-to-day details of the camping trip. Centuries-old giant sequoia trees surrounded Roosevelt. He reached out to touch the cinnamon-colored bark of the Grizzly Giant. It felt spongy. Twisted tree limbs reached toward the sky, so heavy they didn't even sway in the afternoon wind. Deep in the forest, a squirrel chattered. Then a bird sang. The president whistled back, hoping to draw out his first Yosemite bird. A robin dropped from a branch and pushed debris about on the forest floor. Roosevelt pulled out a pocket-sized notebook he always carried. He wrote down Yosemite Wilderness, May 1903. Robin. Then the president sucked in a deep breath of brisk mountain air. "Now this is bully," he shouted. "Boys, let's build a campfire." When Roosevelt woke up the next morning, he recognized the wonderful music of a hermit thrush, one of his favorite birds. The president was starving. He wrestled the fry pan from Charlie. Before long, bacon-scented smoke drifted into the forest. Then the president scrambled 6 eggs beside the slab of bacon. He ate a huge breakfast, happy to be away from the White House cooks who fussed over his diet. After nibbling on a crust of bread, John Muir picked up a sequoia cone. He shook it. Tiny dark seeds, much smaller than snowflakes, spilled out. Muir explained that from just one seed, the grizzly giant had sprouted about 2,000 years earlier. Other trees in the grove were almost as old. Many were hundreds of years old. Sequoias, Muir added, grew on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada, but nowhere else in the entire world. Roosevelt's eyes widened with surprise. Moments later, Muir scrambled up a nearby sequoia tree stump like a giant goat. He is pretty spry for a 65-year-old, Roosevelt thought. The stump's flat top was big enough to hold a dozen men or more. Muir yelled that it had taken several days to saw down this tree. When it crashed to the ground, the tree shattered into splinters. Sequoia wood was of little use except for fence posts, but lumbermen still continued to cut these trees. The president shook his head in disgust. How could anyone cut a tree that had been growing for so long? For fence posts? What if future generations never saw a giant sequoia tree? He and Mr. Muir would have to chat about forest preservation, but later. It was time to go. Roosevelt swallowed one last cup of coffee, strong and hot, just the way he liked it. His horse snorted and danced sideways along the trail. The president looked back. No one seemed to be following him. Had he truly escaped the ever-watchful eyes of his Secret Service men? Hours later, the two men arrived at Glacier Point with its spectacular views. Swirling wind tried to take the president's hat as Roosevelt and Muir inched out onto overhanging rock at the tip of Glacier Point. Yosemite Valley lay 3,000 feet directly below them. The Merced River, a curving ribbon of gray-blue, flowed through the green valley floor. Rock walls interspersed with waterfalls ringed the valley. Muir pointed out Upper and Lower Yosemite Falls, with mist rising from below and the sheer face of Half Dome. The rugged-looking high mountain country stretched beyond. For a change, Roosevelt was speechless. Suddenly, reporters appeared, interrupting with questions and calls of, "Mr. President, Mr. President." The wind picked up their words and blew them away. The president's jaws snapped shut. Where had they come from? Once again, people and cameras surrounded him. The president was angry, very angry. He marched to his horse. "Boys, keep them away from me," Roosevelt barked at the Secret Service, glad for once that they were lurking nearby. How could he rough it with a crowd around him? At sunset, Roosevelt and Muir picked a new camping spot. The president grabbed an axe and insisted on starting the fire. Sweat flew from his forehead as he chopped firewood. Before long, a sizzling hot campfire glowed in the dark, and once again, Roosevelt took the fry pan from Charlie. While the president chewed his way through a platter of steak and fried potatoes, Muir spoke of the need to provide government protection around every wild grove and forest on the mountains. He urged Roosevelt to set aside land, including the Mariposa Grove of big trees and the state-run Yosemite Valley, which they would visit the next day. The president had never met anyone who talked as much or as fast about the importance of nature. In fact, Muir seemed to live on words, not food. As Roosevelt listened, he heard a noise in the trees above him. Was it a dreaded Secret Service man guarding him in a tree? He listened again. Then he chuckled. In his notebook, the president wrote, "Owl." 4 to 5 inches of snow covered them by morning. "This is bullier yet. I wouldn't miss this for anything," the president shouted, shaking snow from his blankets. He shaved by the light of a roaring campfire, then trimmed and waxed his mustache. That morning, they followed a narrow trail that hugged the vertical granite walls. It was late afternoon when the small, dust-coated group rode into Yosemite Village, a cluster of tents and wooden buildings. A waiting crowd cheered loudly and pressed forward, hoping to shake the president's hand. He dismounted. "Mr. Muir and I slept in a snowstorm last night. This has been the grandest day of my life, one I shall long remember. Just think of where I was last night. Up there." And with a sweep of his hand he pointed to Glacier Point, amid the pines and silver firs, and without a tent. The president waved his hat. "Now Mr. Muir and I will pitch camp near Bridal Veil Fall." He mounted his horse. It reared suddenly, legs pawing the air. Charlie stepped forward to push back the throng. Tails swishing, the pack animals stood at the edge of the campsite. The air turned chilly after the sun set. Suddenly, a mule brayed. Twigs snapped. Suspecting that they had been followed, Charlie disappeared into the dark. He told hundreds of waiting admirers in a nearby meadow to leave because the president was very tired. They went, some of them even on tiptoe, so as not to annoy their president, he later told Roosevelt. As the moon came up, the president took off his shoes and rolled up his pant legs. Wading in the icy cold stream, Roosevelt hollered to John Muir. He was as happy as a boy out of school. Then the two men lay on their mattresses of ferns and fir branches, still talking about the waste of natural resources. For once, the president mostly listened. He respected the mountaineers' advice on the importance of preserving land around the entire country. Above them, El Capitan glowed in the nighttime light. The Merced River flowed softly. Bridal Veil Fall thundered, and it was growing late. The president was tired. "Good night, boys," he said. He burrowed under his blankets and fell asleep. For the third night in a row, he snored. Too soon, though, sunlight streamed into the valley. The president's horse-drawn stagecoach brought his official party. "It was bully," the president said, pumping John Muir's hand. "I've had the time of my life." Roosevelt climbed into his stagecoach and leaned over. "Goodbye, John. Come and see me in Washington." Then he motioned John to come closer. "Be patient. Congress may sleep through my long-winded speeches, but I promise to wake them up." What a magical place, Roosevelt thought, gazing around one last time. He was glad he had come to Yosemite. He felt more alive than ever, thanks to his bully good camping trip with John Muir. Once back in Washington, Roosevelt would be able to do some forest good, as the old naturalist would say. Roosevelt peered in every direction as his stagecoach circled the valley. He wanted to savor his memories of Half Dome, of sunlight washing over glacial rocks, Yosemite Falls roaring, of deer grazing, and the lingering smell of a Yosemite campfire. Then he waved one final goodbye. Moments later, the president was gone in a cloud of dust.
All right, that takes us to the end of our main weekly story. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.